Do you actually have the wrist mobility you need to do a push-up? If you were following along with our last video, you tested with us here by bringing the arms together and then peeling your hands open. A push-up takes around 90 degrees of active mobility, and if you don't have that range, you may be dumping into a place where you just don't have the brakes to stop yourself. So what do you do if you need to get a wrist so that you can do all the stuff you like to do, like chaturanga, flow, push-ups, and more? Follow me. That quick and dirty test is a simple way to do a wrist assessment to get a major sense, but we can also get a little bit deeper by digging into where you actually have movement in the wrist and where you don't. It helps to understand that there are 26 bones and 30 different joints in your wrist, and it's basically like a cartilaginous matrix with all of these bones stuck inside. And a wrist needs to be able to do just about everything. There's a place in all ranges of motion for your wrist to go. So let's start with the most simplest controlled articular rotations of the wrist. It's going to be easiest to truly assess where you're at if you trap the forearm on your thigh, as when the wrist runs out of mobility, most of us roll over the forearm. So go ahead and keep your forearm parallel to the ground and take that wrist into flexion and extension, and then add an abduction. And then we'll make that into a full wrist circle. And these are not your grandma's wrist circles from water aerobics class. Take your time, move really slowly, and notice the places where you move with ease and with comfort. You can take this assessment before and after every single workout you do. Just try grabbing 2 reps on the right and 2 reps on the left. And what you'll generally find here is that there are places where your wrist likes to go and places where it doesn't like to go, and that's what we work on. One note of caution: these are small bones and they're relatively gentle and fragile, so there's not the opportunity for you to put the amount of force you would, say for example, if you were doing hip capsule opening exercises. So I want you to make sure that you think about moving gently and easily. And if working on the floor isn't with enough control for you, you can always take all of these activities to a wall surface so that you truly are in control of how much weight, how much poundage, how much force is being exerted on your wrist. 60 minutes and a lot of sweat later, you'll notice that I am sweaty from class, because personally, I don't like to do deep capsular work before I lift. I always want to make sure to do it after. So this would be my follow-up at the end of a training session, or another great time to do this type of work would be like at home at night if you're sitting around playing games with the kids, watching a show on Netflix. This is the perfect time to start to do this work. When you did those assessments earlier, you probably noticed that there were places in your range where it didn't feel very great. Maybe it just felt like it wasn't smooth, or you really did meet a resistance there. So since we can only work on one line at a time and we're talking about push-ups, let's go for a pretty medial wrist extension here and just come to a place where you begin to feel stretching. Most important for you to remember is that there should never be any closing angle pain, so pain on the closing side of the joint. And to remember here, again, that a wrist can't tolerate as much force as say your hip or your knee could. So the first phase in this would be a 2-minute stretch. And this is why we talked about using the wall earlier. For some of us, especially if your wrists are tender, the weight of your upper body is going to be too much to do this. So you may want to use a wall. Press your hand flat against the wall and come into flexion against the wall as far as you can. Either way, 2 minutes in a passive stretch that doesn't feel like it's too much for you. And then the work is just like we do in class, our pails and our rails. We're going to contract the progressive angle of the wrist, which would mean here to think about pushing down into the pads of your fingers as if you were going to push the floor away. And we'll ramp from 10% of strength slowly up until you're giving it everything you have, pushing the floor away as strongly as you can, and then slowly ramp that down and rest. I am not a fan of rails contraction, so squeezing the regressive side in a wrist one, just because for most people you can't tell it now, but when you come up it feels like broken glass in the wrist. And if you're someone like you saw Jalen earlier in the video who really doesn't have a lot of wrist extension, then you're going to need to move forward at a snail's pace. So a few rounds of pails, pushing away and softening, pushing away and softening. And then you can upload that into your brain by finding that passive range angle and then peel away. Let's say 10 reps. Notice I lost some angle here. Set the hand back down, lean into passive range. Even in this position, imagine lifting the hand up as you peel and try to maintain that angle. Make that 10 reps, hit your cervical, your capsular cars again, on each side, and keep that up a couple of times a week until you start to see some improvements in your wrist range of motion. Do you have questions, struggles, challenges with that? Post them down below so our community can help you answer them.